Okay. And I just wanted to welcome everyone and thank you for being part of our very first Climate Change and Resilient Communities webinar. I'm Sandra Bogan. I am the Resilience Navigator with St. Lucie County's Environmental Resources Department. And I know most of you are familiar with the term resilience generally. It's the ability of a person, object, or community to withstand or bounce back from stressors or unexpected events. But from a community perspective, resilience is about reducing risk to people, the economy, and the environment from extreme events like tropical storms and hurricanes, and from chronic stressors that we're beginning to see from climate change, including rising sea levels, increased flooding, and warming temperatures. You could say that our resilience was tested over the past year with our shared experience of the pandemic and the unusual and novel impacts it had on our neighbors and on our communities. And so, like the pandemic, responding to the local impacts we're seeing from climate change and those impacts that we anticipate experiencing in the near future, it will require us to look at the resilience of our community in a different way than we're used to. For instance, we know how to prepare, withstand, and recover from hurricanes and tropical storms and recover from them pretty quickly. We are good at that. But local impacts from climate change are not only those extreme events that just move through, move on and move through quickly and we get straight to recovery phase. It also includes those chronic, more long-lasting stressors, like sea level doesn't go down fast, or the temperatures are not going to decrease. It's almost the new norm. And so we have to just really look at a lot of aspects in our community through a resilience lens. Ultimately, the purpose is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of people and our community. So in case anybody doesn't know, right now, St. Lucie County, Port St. Lucie, Fort Pierce, as well as St. Lucie Village are working together to develop a community-wide resilience plan to effectively and proactively as we can be at this point, take steps to reduce our risk from local climate change impacts. But climate change is really complex. It's a complex issue, and it's a government cannot do it alone. And so it will require a lot of involvement from citizens and leaders in our community, citizens and leaders like you. And I just want to, point out that there really is good news too. Relative to a lot of other areas and a lot of other communities that have large metropolitan communities right on their waterfront, or they don't have land, or they just don't have the room to sort of redevelop their communities, St. Lucie County is actually in a pretty good position if we get out in front of this to succeed in this mission. And unlike counties to the south of us, we also have a little time to get it right. But we have to start now, and that's why we're really happy that you joined us today, because this is the first step in starting the conversation and creating a vision for a resilient and thriving St. Lucie community well into the future. And with that, we have a really great lineup today. I just kind of want to review what the day looks like and what you can expect. We have several speakers. We have a very, very short break in between in case anybody wants to grab a drink. And we're going to use the chat room, and hopefully everybody knows how to get to their chat room. Oh, I see it. I see my little closed caption. Everybody knows how to get to the chat room. You can type questions and comments in there anytime. After each speaker, we'll get through as many of those questions as we can. and also at the end, we have a pretty packed schedule, but if we have any time at the end, we will also try to continue the conversation at the end. And so with that, I'm very happy to introduce our first speaker. It's Natalie Friedberg. She actually put this awesome series together. Natalie is the education coordinator at the Oxbow Eco Center. She creates and implements environmental education programs for youth and adults, including Oxbow's premier education program, the St. Lucie Water Champions, which this series is a part of. Natalie has her master's in environmental education from Florida Atlantic University and a bachelor's degree in environmental science and anthropology. So a lot of interesting information there. So Natalie, thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sandy. And hello, everyone. My name is Natalie Friedberg, and I'm the Education Coordinator for St. Lucie County's Environmental Resources Department. Thank you for joining us today for the Resilient St. Lucie webinar series. This is part 1, Climate Change, a Water Story. Just some housekeeping for today. We will have all participants muted to avoid interruptions. Our lead tech today is Amanda Thompson, and she will unmute presenters as they're needed to present. If you have any tech issues, please message her. She's Oxbow Eco Center in the chat box. You can message her directly. And as we're getting started, please take a moment to update your name in the video box. So to do this, just hover your mouse over the video box, look for the 3 dots in the upper corner, select rename, and spell out your full name. Today, we'll be using the chat box to interact with participants, and we hope that you'll take a moment to make comments and ask questions in the chat box as we go. And then after each presentation, Sandra Bogan will give us 5 minutes, and she'll ask all of our questions to the presenter. So here's our agenda for today. I'm going to do a quick overview to begin with of the land-water connection and the Indian River Lagoon. Then we have Holly Abels from Florida Sea Grant that'll be going over the basics of climate change and local risks. Around 2 p.m., we'll have a 10-minute break for us to go to the bathroom and get a drink or a snack if you need it. Then we have Kathy LaMartina from South Florida Water Management District talking about water management and a changing climate. And then we're going to round the afternoon out with Amanda Thompson from the St. Lucie Environmental Resources Department with a groundwater model demonstration. So let's get started with the land-water connection. So why are we here today? This webinar series is about resiliency in St. Lucie County and the Indian River Lagoon estuary. But to learn to be resilient, we have to understand the issues. Let's face it, all of our waterways are plagued with impaired water quality, modifications to their basins, a loss of critical habitats, and the growing risk of climate change and sea level rise. One of our local bodies tends to be the poster child for degradation in water issues, and rightly so. In our precious estuary is the Indian River Lagoon. So we'll start off today by going over some basics about the lagoon, what threats the lagoon is facing, including climate change, and what we as a community can do to help and preserve this precious resource. In this first presentation today, I'll be setting the stage for the rest of the presentations. So here we have our Indian River Lagoon. The Indian River Lagoon runs along Florida's eastern coast. It's about 156 miles long, spanning 5 counties. And the lagoon watershed covers over 2,000 square miles of land and spans 353 square miles of water. Its width varies from about a half mile in some places to 5 miles across in others, and its average depth is only about 4 feet. It is considered to be an estuary because it is where the fresh water from our rivers meets the salt water in the ocean, and it mixes to form brackish water. And there are 5 inlets along the lagoon where it connects to the ocean. It's comprised of 3 main sections. So if you look on the map, we have Mosquito Lagoon in the north in red. We have the Banana River in yellow. The main section of the Indian River Lagoon is in blue. And down at the bottom, we have the St. Lucie River that dumps into the St. Lucie Inlet and connects to the lagoon in the ocean at the bottom. The Indian River Lagoon is an ecological treasure. It's one of the most biodiverse estuaries in North America. It has over 4,300 species documented, 700 of which are fish and over 300 are birds. There are about 50 listed species that call the lagoon home and many more on the way, and it's definitely a very special ecosystem. The Indian River Lagoon was actually nominated as an estuary of national significance, and it joined the National Estuaries Program in 1990 under the sponsorship of the St. John's and South Florida Water Management Districts. Today, the IRLNEP is sponsored by the IRL Council, which was established in 2015, and it has representatives from 5 counties bordering the lagoon. In addition to being an ecological treasure, the Indian River Lagoon is also very valuable to our local economy. It is an economic driver for the 5 counties that border it. In the 2016 economic valuation study by the East Central Florida and Treasure Coast Regional Planning Councils, they showed that the total economic output from the IRL in 2014 was about $7.6 billion. In addition, the real estate value for properties along the lagoon add more than $900 million. And then in addition to that, the ecosystem services and quality of life that it provides for the community are priceless. Although the Indian River Lagoon is so valuable environmentally and economically, our local communities have not always been the best stewards of this ecosystem, and it's a system in decline. We are seeing a decline in the overall health, warming waters, reduced water clarity, harmful algal blooms, declining habitats and species populations, and the accumulation of muck. We're also seeing animals getting entangled and ingesting plastic pollution in our lagoon. So what are some of the main causes and threats? Some of the main causes are changes to the watershed. So humans have altered the hydrology in the whole watershed. We've changed the way that we use the land, and we've created a lot of impervious surfaces where we've built houses, roads, and parking lots. We've also been altering our ecosystem through point and non-point source pollution. So point source pollution is pollution that comes from a very well-known source. If you see a pipe and it's dumping a chemical into a river, you can point at it and you can say that's the source of the pollution. We also have non-point source pollution, which is a large contributor in our area as well. And that's things like litter, sediment, and nutrients from fertilizers and pet waste that wash off the land when it rains, and they end up going in our storm drains and into our canals, rivers, and eventually out to the ocean. These are what seem to be the biggest players, but are there others? Yes, of course there are. There's also ocean acidification, pharmaceuticals, pesticides, and other chemicals, heavy metals, but these are just some of the biggest threats to our watershed. We also have climate change and misuse of resources that will be, and exotic species that we'll be talking about today and tomorrow. So here we have a diagram of our Indian River Lagoon watershed. As you can see, we have our Indian River Lagoon off to the right, our Atlantic Ocean. You can see the St. Lucie River, and then there's a lot of different canals that are labeled on here connecting to the St. Lucie River and to the Indian River Lagoon. So as humans have changed the landscape over time, we've been changing the size of our watershed as well, because we've been connecting all of these canals to the river and to the lagoon. And we've actually increased the size of the watershed by 146%. So from 1913 to 2013, it's increased from 572,000 to 1,400,000 acres. So by increasing the size of it, we're also increasing the amount of water that's draining in our watershed and the amount of pollutants that are washing into the watershed as well. Here we have downtown Fort Pierce. So you can see on the left, we have some very dense development in downtown Fort Pierce. It's pretty light because there's lots of impervious surfaces like buildings, roads, and parking lots. We can see our canal here. That's the C-25 that outfalls into the Indian River Lagoon near Wesley's Island. We also have the Fort Pierce Inlet going out to the Atlantic Ocean. And this is Port St. Lucie and Stewart and our St. Lucie River. You can also see that there's some very dense development happening in this area along the St. Lucie River's North Fork. And that's the lighter areas. And we do have some darker areas that are preserved lands as well, and public lands. And these act as buffers for the water. So an example of that is the Oxbow Eco Center Preserve. You can also see on here, Savannah's Preserve State Park is a really nice one along the lagoon as well. So one of the big issues that we're having with pollution is sediment pollution. So although it's not a toxin or a chemical, soils and sediments that erode and wash into waterways have a negative effect on our aquatic systems. Fine, lightweight particles often stay suspended in the water, making it turbid or decreasing the water clarity. These sediments also cover and kill aquatic vegetation like seagrass, and they can end up on our coral reefs as well and cover them. This sediment can contribute to the muck issue that we have. If you look in these photos, you can see examples of the muck from our lagoon. And when we end up with large quantities of mucks on the bottom of the lagoon, it changes the properties of our benthic environment, and it cascades the effects of this into the benthic fauna and up the food chain. Next, we're going to talk about nutrients. So these are another one of the big culprits in our aquatic systems. Nutrients support plant growth. So a lot of times we put them onto our lawns and our gardens because we want to help them grow, but it also helps other plants grow in our lagoon. So it's not just nutrients or fertilizers that input nutrients into the system. They can also come from grass clippings or leaves, other yard waste. If you have a septic system or sewer pipe that breaks, animal waste from wildlife, but mostly from your pets that gets left out on land, can wash into our waterways and contribute to it, and any decomposing organisms. So all of this nutrients that ends up in our waterways, it helps the plants in the waterways grow as well. And a big one is algae. And you guys have probably heard in the news about algal blooms, which is a population explosion of microscopic phytoplankton algae. And like plants, they respire. These aquatic plant respiration can decrease the oxygen levels in the water, especially at night. And this can result in fish kills by lowering the amount of oxygen in the water for the fish. In addition, these algae blooms decrease the water clarity, making it harder for the sunlight to reach the aquatic plants growing on the bottom, such as seagrass. And the seagrass doesn't take kindly to this. Then to top it all off, when this algae dies off, it decomposes, adds more nutrients back into the system, and can create a blanket over anything on the bottom. In addition to the increased nutrients causing these harmful algal blooms, increased water temperatures also play a role. And tomorrow we're actually going to have Dr. Tim Moore speaking more about this. A big issue we're seeing is plastics in the ocean. Plastics make up about 80 to 90% of all marine debris. The vast majority of marine debris originates on land. So people let some of their stuff go when they're having a picnic, it blows out of your trash. A few people might intentionally throw stuff on the ground. And even though you're putting it on land, eventually it's going to make its way into our waterways. The majority of marine litter is called single-use plastics. So things that you just use one time, like a fork that's plastic or a straw. And these don't biodegrade like most things. What they actually do is called photodegradation, which means that the light breaks it down and it crumbles into smaller and smaller pieces and turns into microplastics, but it doesn't actually go away. Now, one of the main topics we're going to be talking about in this webinar is climate change and sea level rise. So like Sandy talked about earlier, We are going to be seeing some impacts of climate change and sea level rise in our area, but they're not nearly as intense as what they're going to be seeing down in Broward County, in Miami, and the Florida Keys. On average, St. Lucie County is about 60 feet above sea level rise, or above sea level, which is great. But again, that's an average. That's not everywhere in the county. Fort Pierce and Port St. Lucie are more like 16.4 feet above sea level, and Stewart on average is about 10 feet above sea level. So if you look at the map in the top right corner, and you see some orange that's highlighted, that's all the areas that are less than 3 feet above sea level rise, or above sea level. So really our coastal areas and around the St. Lucie River are the areas that will be impacted the most. And in the short term, it's projected to be between 10 to 17 inches by 2040. We'll definitely be seeing some changes to our waterways and aquatic ecosystems. So we've talked a lot about the threats and issues with our waterways. So let's talk about some solutions. We don't want it to be all doom and gloom today. Alone, we can do so little, but together we can do a lot. So let's see what we can do. One that I really am passionate about is reducing single-use plastics. So as you're going through your day, think about everything that you're using. For me, I like to focus on, like, if you get a Gatorade, that's something that you get every day and you use it once, and those have a huge impact. So if you just think about subbing out some things in your lifestyle, it can really decrease your impact on our aquatic systems. Also with fertilizers. In Florida, with a lot of our plants, it's not really necessary to use them. We have some good nutrients in much of the soil in Florida. And between June 1st and September 30th, that's our homeowner no fertilization use period. If you really think that you need to use fertilizer, make sure to get it tested by University of Florida to see if you're lacking nutrients in your soil. And then during October 1st to May 31st, there are still some restrictions on the fertilizer you're allowed to use. So make sure you look up your local fertilizer ordinances and buy your fertilizer accordingly, or just don't use it. Make sure that you're bagging and mulching your grass clippings. These are a really big contributor to nutrients because they can wash really easily into our waterways, into our canals, our rivers, and break down and add nutrients to these systems. So make sure you're bagging it or composting it and getting rid of it and not just letting it wash away. To help trap some of this stuff before it makes it into our waterways, it's great to create living shorelines and buffer zones. So if you have your lawn mowed and you have a canal in your backyard, give yourself some room, give yourself a few feet before the water and runoff makes it into your waterway so that it can trap any yard waste, any fertilizers, and it can absorb it, slow it down before it gets into the water. This is a big one and an easy one. Pick up after your pets. If you think about it, the animals that live here, they eat food in the forest, then it goes through their systems, they go to the bathroom, and it gets absorbed by plants, and it's a closed system. The nutrients just cycle around and around. But with your pets, they're not eating things that come from your backyard. You're importing food from somewhere else. So if you're just leaving your pet waste there, it just kind of builds up, but it's being imported constantly from new places, and it's just adding more nutrients into the system that weren't originally here and aren't needed here. So make sure to pick up after your pets. And since the main focus of our webinar today and tomorrow is climate change, really think about reducing your carbon footprint. So your ecological footprint is how many planets you would need if everyone lived like you and how much carbon you're using within a year. So we're doing a cool initiative right now on our website. If you go to oxboweco.com on our Earth Day page, you can actually calculate your carbon footprint. We link it to a carbon footprint calculator. And St. Lucie County is pledging to offset everyone's carbon footprint that goes in, fills out our form, and we're going to be planting new trees and bushes. So it'll offset 1 year of your carbon footprint. So that's a really easy way for you guys to offset it. Just calculate your carbon, fill out our form, and we'll do the work for you. Or you can join us for a stewardship event and plant some trees yourself. Next, your voice is really important. Make sure that you're using it, you're talking to your community members, and also voting and supporting land acquisition, supporting stormwater improvement projects, and educating your neighbors, friends, and family about some of these issues. And lastly, we encourage everyone to volunteer, get involved with some of the things we have going on. So at St. Lucie County, we have about 30 different preserves, and we do restoration projects, cleanups, have citizen science projects you can help with, and outreach and education as well. So if you guys are interested in helping out and getting involved, you can go to oxboweco.com and click on the volunteer tab. If you want to learn more about some of these issues and resources, go to stluciewaterchampions.com, check out the IRL Council, savetheirl.org. And again, I'm Natalie Frenberg. If you guys want to get in contact with me, I'm at the Oxbow Eco Center, and here's my email. And next, we're going to be having, or actually, do you want to do a Q&A, Sandy? Have we gotten any questions?
We sure have. We've gotten a couple. I'm almost feeling like, we'll see how it goes, because I'm almost feeling like there's a lot of people who could add to the conversation. But Haley Deal, you are obviously a teacher. You were making some funny hand signals. I thought you were trying to get my attention. I have got to unmute you. Hold on a second. Okay, I just asked to unmute you, so maybe you can unmute yourself. So Haley, oh, there you are.
I'm sorry, I'm actually listening to you guys, and I'm also teaching my last class of the day, so that's probably because I'm talking across the room to other kids.
That's funny, you had me a little worried. I could only see like you and one other person, and you were
Yeah, I'm in a live thing, kind of.
That's funny, Natalie. I can't believe you saw her. I'm like, what is Natalie saying? She's trying to get our attention. She's doing this crazy thing. But anyway, Haley has the, the question of how can she encourage her students to reduce their own non-point source pollution? And maybe not even just their own, but we could, Haley, think their neighborhood, their community, but certainly their own.
Yeah, some of the biggest things that they can do is really focus on their single-use plastics, pick up their yard waste, and pick up after their pets. If they want more information, they can go onto our website, stluciewaterchampions.com. There's lots of tips on there. And if you go onto our Earth Day website as well, we have a bunch of Earth actions that anyone in the community can take, and we actually have free giveaways. So if your kids want to go on, they can do something that's an Earth action. They can show that they bought a reusable water bottle, take a photo with it, upload it to us, and we'll give them a free giveaway. We have some reusable tote bags, and we have some cutlery as well that they can bring in their lunchbox and use every day. So definitely check those resources out. Oh, you have one. That's awesome to see.
And one of the things, and if anybody wants to add in the chat box too, I'm not sure how to unmute everybody, but
you can just ask their questions.
Yeah. So one thing, Haley, that I was with the Oxbow for a long time before I took this new position, but one thing that we would do is like kind of have, okay, here's a candy wrapper, and here's an aluminum can. Which is the most dangerous? Maybe we didn't say it this way, but they think the big stuff, the aluminum can, is more dangerous. But when you think about it, that candy wrapper looks like a jellyfish in the water. So that turtle is going to eat that candy wrapper. And so I think that, like, as just citizens, we need to stop walking by loose plastic bags just because we weren't the ones that dropped them, right? Or little pieces of plastic. I mean, things like that really matter. And, plastic is one of those things, we only have one more question, so I thought I'd take this time. Plastic is one of those things that have not been around. I remember getting bottled milk in Connecticut, right? So delivered to my house. But you know, we have to decorate those Gatorade bottles, Natalie. So it's not just the plastic bottle, it's this wrap that breaks down into a zillion little plastic pieces, and it's in all of our water, in our drinking water even. So I think that's just a really important that it is my responsibility to clean up carefully, nothing dangerous.
I actually was just speaking with my students about being careful what kind of acne products and body wash products that they use, because microbeads are microplastic as they are already produced. So in order for them to reduce their plastic intake, they also have to be mindful if there's any plastic actually in their stuff. And sorry about the background noise.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, some soaps they'll have like a pearly glisten to them, and they actually just put plastic into the soap just to give it that look. There's no actual beneficial reason for it to be in there. So that's a great thing to look at your labels for. And like as they're getting older and buying more things, just try to sub out. Like if I go grocery shopping and there's two products that are super similar and one of them has a glass bottle and one of them has a plastic bottle, I'll pick the glass one because it's easier to recycle and breaks down easier because you can just break it back down into sand.
Yeah, it starts with the buyer, and then also recycling. I mean, I'm sorry, passing things on, you know, before you throw something in the garbage, could it be used by somebody else, and taking that time to do it. Haley also just wanted to confirm that the plants that were going to be given away for the reduction of your annual your 1 year carbon footprint are natives, and I didn't even have to ask staff, but that was a definite yes. And then I see Diane Goldberg, who's awesome, and she said I'd be glad to give away native plants, and she has her phone number and her email in there. Tell their parents to plant natives and not use fertilizers was part of the answer from our group. And I did also, thank you, Kara Gilmore, Team Orca, both the Oxbow Team Orca and several organizations in the community have some amazing resources for teachers, like online Orca, which if you're not familiar, Haley, is Ocean Research and Conservation Association. They have some great opportunities for stewardship.
So our next speaker is Holly Abels. She's been with Florida Sea Grant Extension Agent for the University of Florida IFAS Extension Office in Brevard County since January 2010. She has a Master's of Science degree in Environmental Science from Florida Gulf Coast University and a Bachelor of Science in Marine Science from Long Island University, Southampton College. Her extension programs include teaching the Florida Master Naturalist Program, working with communities to address climate change and sea level rise, working with volunteers on projects like the Florida Horseshoe Crab Watch, and she'll be giving a presentation today on the basics of climate change and impacts in Florida. So thank you so much, Holly. Glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so I am in Brevard County, so just a couple counties north of you guys. So, but I do really love St. Lucie and the Stewart area. I have friends that live there. So thank you for having me here today. I'm just going to jump right in, get us started. So if you want to put in the chat real quick, and I have the chat open so I can see what you guys say to this question, but I just wanted to know what one word or phrase you think of when you hear the words climate change or global warming. I'm going to look back at that as I move forward in the presentation. So like Natalie said, I'll be talking about kind of climate basics and a little bit about local risks. But first I wanted to make sure that you guys understand the difference between weather and climate. So we know that weather and climate aren't the same thing. Weather is what is happening outside your window right now. So this is a picture I actually took this morning when I got to work of what it looked like outside. It's pretty cloudy, right? So the weatherman told me today that there was, a 50% chance of rain. So I brought my, raincoat with me to work. And it was going to be maybe a little bit cooler today than it was earlier in the week. So really weather is just what's going on outside. It can change from minute to minute, as we know it does here in Florida, right? So we can have a thunderstorm pop up at any time. And it's really just the short term. You kind of know what's going to happen today, tomorrow, maybe the next day, right? But climate is actually the average of many years of weather observations. So we're thinking long term, and in long term in climate speak, as is really meaning 30 years or more. So we're looking really, really long term. We're covering a wide area. And so it's not just what's happening in your city or your county at one time. And then we're taking into account seasonal changes. So I'm going to also talk a little bit about climate normals, because there has been some news lately about updating of climate normals. And so there's several factors that go into climate and what affects climate. So we have abiotic factors, and abiotic meaning non-living part of an ecosystem that shapes the environment. So things like volcanic activity, solar radiation, topography, ocean currents, stuff like that. And then biotic factors is a living organism that shapes its environment. So we have here transpiration, respiration, photosynthesis, decomposition, digestion. So those are things like related to plants. So photosynthesis, decomposition, bacteria. So these are living organisms that are affecting our environment and the climate. And many times when we talk about climate change, I think a couple of you put in here about carbon emissions. Yeah, so we hear a lot about greenhouse gases when we're talking about climate change. And these are the 4 greenhouse gases that you probably normally hear about when we're talking about the climate. These occur naturally in our Earth's atmosphere. It's actually really important that we do have these greenhouse gases in our environment. And we usually talk specifically about carbon dioxide, usually when we're talking about climate change. But I want to make sure that you guys understand the greenhouse effect. So this is without greenhouse gases, so the ones that I mentioned in the slide before, Earth would be a frozen world. We'd probably be more like Mars, because these greenhouse gases actually trap sunlight that hits the Earth and it reflects it back, causing the Earth to warm. And this is what makes Earth habitable. This is why plants and animals, are able to survive and thrive on Earth. It's because of this greenhouse effect. And so sometimes this is referred to in like the education circles as a heat trapping blanket. So that's kind of like an easy way to help understand, what the greenhouse effect does and how important it is to life on Earth. But too much of those greenhouse gases, like carbon dioxide in the air, does make the Earth get warmer and warmer. So this increase of these gases is what's warming the planet because of this greenhouse effect. The blanket is getting thicker. We're having many more blankets. And so our Earth is increasing in temperature. And we've known about this greenhouse effect itself since like the 1800s. So this is well known. Carbon is also part of the carbon cycle, which is a really important component of life on Earth. So carbon is a very important element. All living things are made of carbon. And it's also part of the ocean, the air, and rocks, soil. And because the Earth is a dynamic place, carbon does not stay still for very long. So it's always moving in this cycle. In the atmosphere, carbon's attached to oxygen that creates carbon dioxide. Plants use that carbon dioxide and sunlight to make their own food and grow. And the carbon becomes part of the plant. So when the plant dies and it's buried, that could turn over time, over millions of years, into fossil fuels like coal and oil. And those are what we're using today to take out of the ground and to burn for our own human activities, right? So when we burn those fossil fuels, most of the carbon quickly enters the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. And because of that greenhouse effect and that heat trapping blanket, increase in CO2, we know that the temperature has increased over time. And so when we talk about climate change, we're referring to that increase of carbon dioxide and those other greenhouse gases in our atmosphere over time. And we know because of this that our temperature has been increasing over time as well. There once was a time When my career, when I first started getting into science, that, the idea of reaching 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was something that we had to stop, right? But now we're way past that. We're up to 410 or more. And so it just keeps, that level of carbon dioxide is keeping to increase. And that's the one thing that people, when we're talking about climate change actions, is reducing that amount of carbon dioxide that's getting into our atmosphere. There is a big lag effect. So the amount of carbon dioxide we see in the atmosphere today is going to affect temperature changes in the future. So we have to stop those types of things now, releasing carbon dioxide, in order to have an effect on future temperature changes. I also want to just briefly talk about sea level rise, because Natalie did bring this up. All of Florida is affected by sea level rise, no matter where you live along our coasts, but in our estuaries as well, and even our rivers. So there are two reasons why sea level rises. First is the oceans are warming. So the oceans actually absorb temperature and CO2. So they kind of absorb some of that heat. And as water warms, it expands. So this is just basic, I guess, physics. That happens. And the other reason why sea levels are rising is because of melting land ice. So glaciers, ice caps, ice sheets. We know that if you have like a glass of water and you have ice in your water, the water level doesn't change when the ice melts. That's because it's already displaced the water, the space that it's taking up. So, but if you have ice on land that is melting, it's kind of like rivers flowing into the ocean. So you're getting more water into the ocean that wasn't previously there. Another thing about sea level rise is that it doesn't, or I'll talk about that in the next slide, but I just want you to remember these two kind of different components. Another thing about our oceans taking in heat and increasing in volume is that we actually would see a large and a greater effect of temperature in our atmosphere if our oceans didn't absorb some of that temperature already. So, we could be much warmer without our oceans. And there is a lot of discussions and research and science going into, trying to figure out how much more the oceans can actually take in on both carbon dioxide and, that temperature. It's definitely an unknown as how much the sea level will rise if more and more land ice melts. So we've been measuring over long periods of time sea level rising. So we've used tide gauges in the past. Now we have satellites that can also do the same thing, measure that sea level rise over time. One important thing to note about sea level rise is that sea level doesn't rise evenly around the world. So the amount of sea level rise that's going to happen in Florida or in Southeast Florida and St. Lucie County is not going to be the same amount of sea level rise that's going to happen in, say, New England or California or Hawaii or other countries. So for instance, places along the northern Gulf of Mexico, like the Louisiana area, sea level is rising much faster there, mainly because the land is sinking. So because of fossil fuels being taken out of the ground, the land is actually sinking because of that loss of those fossil fuels. And so sea level is rising really fast there. But in other places like Alaska, the sea level is not rising very much, or it's even, the sea level is getting lower. So it's kind of a decrease in sea level versus a sea level rise. And that's because the melting glaciers, ice and rock and everything is so heavy that when it melts, it actually causes the land to kind of bounce back up. And so the land is actually increasing in height instead of sinking. So you don't see a greater level of sea level rise in a place like that. But on average, the global sea level for the globe has risen about 8 inches since about 1900. and with about 3 of those inches just occurring within since 1993. So at our current rate, we increase sea level about 1 inch per decade, a little bit more than 1 inch. And so we know that our communities, our natural resources, our infrastructure are all going to be impacted by climate change and are already being impacted. So this is something that is occurring today and has been occurring. So it's not something that's in the future. This is something that's happening now. And there's a lot of different effects that are going to be occurring and continue to occur because of this. So one of the things I wanted to kind of go back to is those climate normals, or the observations of weather that we see over long periods of time. So actually just last week, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration issued its latest climate normals. And so this is a baseline of data of temperature, rain, snow, and other variables that have been collected over the past 3 decades at thousands of locations across the country. So these normals, they use those observations over the previous 30 years, and it's the basic weather data that we make use of. And you probably don't even realize that you do use it. One small example of this is that, so how we know that yesterday's high temperature was above or below normal. So anytime you hear the weathermen say, today's temperature is going to be 5 degrees above normal for this time of year. So now that normal is going to be higher. So it's going to be based off of hotter temperatures in the temperature range. So you can see over time how much that normal has changed. And so we're seeing hotter temperatures, and that new normal is just hotter. And it will continue to be like that into the future, because almost every year is hotter on average than the year before. So warming is the new normal. These climate normals do provide really important information for a range of economic sectors. They inform growers' decisions on when to plant crops and what crops to plant, how electrical utilities can expect energy demand to vary by season, and then planning of construction projects. And so while warming has been significant, even in the past decade, kind of zooming out to see how that steady increase is really striking, to see just how much it has changed over time. So I'm going to have a kind of a series of graphs that are going to depict different types of data related to West Palm Beach. And that's because that's the closest city to St. Lucie County where I could find this data on Climate Central. Climate Central has just a lot of really good, easy to view graphs. And it's really easy to kind of help describe different types of components of climate. So the next one I wanted to show is about extreme heat. So extreme heat definitely looks much different today than it did just 50 years ago. Of the 242 cities analyzed by Climate Central, 59% of those experienced 3 or more additional days of extreme heat. And because NASA and NOAA announced the 2020 year-to-date global temperatures, those were the second hottest on record, just behind 2016. So like I said, every year we kind of get warmer and warmer. And why this is important is because extreme heat is dangerous. So it's the top weather killer, and is especially difficult, especially this past year, to shelter from extreme heat. And it poses a serious risk to outdoor workers and lower income communities. So hotter and more humid summers increase the risk from heat-related illnesses like heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Higher summer temperatures will increase electricity use from air conditioning, so causing higher summer peak loads and potentially stressing the power grid. And when the heat gets extreme, highways and railroads can buckle. So there's lots of components of increased heat that we have to be thinking about. And I'm going to put in the chat a link to this documentary that I learned about a couple weeks ago, which really helped to show how extreme heat will affect workers that are basically collecting our fruits and vegetables from the farm. So I'll put a link to that in the chapter so you guys can watch that. It's a really good little documentary. So another thing is that as the world warms from the increase of greenhouse gases, there's more evaporation from oceans, lakes, rivers, even plants. So every 1 degree of warming, the saturation level of the atmosphere increases by about 4%. So this just means there's more water in the atmosphere that can condense into precipitation. So we have more heavier downpours. So we'll see things like more flash flooding, larger river flooding, and some flooding is a really big component of increases of carbon dioxide, increases of climate change over time. So this is going to affect lots of different places. This is increase in flooding or increase in rainfall. And if you are an allergy sufferer like myself, you might have heard this past year is really bad allergy season, right? So rising temperatures do change the length of the growing season. So, and that would be the length of the pollen season. And so this directly impacts plant growth. You know, there is a slight benefit or a benefit to increase in temperatures, because that just means that we're going to have longer growing seasons, so we could grow more plants at different times of the year. You know, but this also affects allergies, which is a huge burden on our vulnerable populations, including lower income and minority communities. And we've probably heard more about the intensification of hurricanes. And so we'll see maybe not necessarily more hurricanes, even though we did see a lot of hurricanes in the past couple of years, but that we'll see hurricanes that are much stronger. So intensification is going to occur much more readily as we move forward. And every year we do see that there's what we would call billion-dollar disasters. Last year, the US experienced $22 billion disasters, and that cost a total of just over $96 billion and 262 deaths. And you can see the different types of disasters that we saw last year. And last year was the kind of the top year of disasters that we've seen over the many years that they've been monitoring this, I think since the 80s. And so just some of the top climate hazards we'll see in our area. Obviously, storms and sea level rise are going to be greater and higher. Ocean chemistry also. So I'm not going to even go into ocean acidification, but that's a whole nother topic. And that heat waves and water deficit. So a lack of fresh water is going to be a big component as we move forward as well. So we already are seeing so many impacts and challenges. We're going to see more of that, but there is hope, right? So Natalie has already talked about different things that you can do, and I'm sure as you see other presentations, there's going to be more discussions about adaptation and mitigation and just what everyone can do to help lower their greenhouse gas emissions. So you do have a voice, and your actions do matter. These are just a couple of things that you can do, and I'm sure many of you are already doing these things. Reduce, reuse, recycle, refuse, be green in your yard. Think about the choices you make as a consumer, solar, fuel efficient vehicles, all those types of things, are going to really help in the long run. So individual actions do matter. And it's not too late to plan. So, some of the talks you'll hear today and tomorrow, we'll talk about that planning. It's not an insurmountable problem. So there are things that we can do now to adapt and mitigate for climate change. And the decisions today can deliver socioeconomic, built, and natural systems that withstand change and improve quality of life for everyone. So there are lots of solutions to our climate change problem. They're in crisis. And that's all I have.
The first question that came in was from Diane Goldberg when we were looking at sea level rise. 1 inch per decade doesn't sound like much. How much worse is it during super tides?
Oh, yeah. So I didn't even talk about high tide flooding. Um, so I know 1 inch doesn't seem like a lot, but Florida, as Natalie mentioned, is a very flat place. An inch can extend for a long period of time. So it's just even a small incremental increase will affect us. What happens during the super tides is that there's just more of that water, coming in. So even with that just 1 inch of sea level rise that we've seen, with more of that water, that's why we see just more flooding, during that super tide events. And it's just going to get worse and worse over time, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. And then Sarah asked, why would there be less storms in 2050?
Yeah, I saw that when I saw the West Palm, and I'm not sure. Like I said before, I think we're not going to necessarily see more storms or more hurricanes, but we are going to see an increase in intensity of storms. So we'll see more like category 4 and 5 storms. And so I think maybe that's what is being taken into account, is that storms are still going to really affect us. We're going to have to worry about storms, but it's not going to necessarily be the number. It's going to be the intensity of the storms.
Okay, and Haley asked, would that not affect the winter resistant plants and crops when you're talking about growing season and allergy season?
Yeah, so one of the things I said, I think, was like that there could be a benefit, right? So there's actually discussions going on right now about how Florida could start growing coffee because of our changing climate. I know, right? Like, I'm excited. I want some like Florida grown coffee. So yeah, there will be a benefit as far as like there might be areas that could have different types of crops that could be grown. But there will also be a downside in that there are some crops that need like a colder period, like they need maybe not necessarily frost, but they need it to be colder at night in order for them to flower. And I think of peaches. So they need like there to be some cold in order for them to have flowers that can be germinated so that peaches can grow. And so there will be probably a detriment to those plants. So there might not be Georgia peaches someday, right? Because it'll be too hot, for peaches to be grown in Georgia. So it might be North Carolina or South Carolina peaches, right? So it goes either way. So there'll some plants that need the cold will have to be grown in higher latitudes. Some plants that need more warmth might be able to be grown in higher latitudes. There will be longer growing seasons. Yeah, so there'll be winners and losers, definitely.
And I think Diane Goldberg does not want to take a break because she wanted to know about, don't we all have to worry about saltwater intrusion in our shallow aquifers the closer we live to the coast?
Yep, so that's a great question, Diane. So that Florida has a limestone topography, right? So underneath us, it's basically all holes, so yeah, we will see more of that saltwater intrusion. So we'll just basically see the push of saltwater pushing in and moving the freshwater more inland, I guess you could say. And so we might have to dig deeper and deeper for freshwater, which costs money, and we won't be able to use those more shallow, aquifers. And yeah, that's going to affect not only the coast, but people inland as well, right? Depending on where your water source comes from. So yes, good point, Diane.
Okay, everyone, it's time to come back from break. Our next speaker is going to be Ms. Kathy LaMartina. She acts as a regional intergovernmental liaison, program and project manager, and water resource education specialist, representing the South Florida Water Management District in the Treasure Coast of Florida. She holds a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering technology from the Florida Institute of Technology She has over 30 years of experience in designing and managing government and public affairs programs, projects, campaigns, activities associated with environmental and water resources. Today, she will be presenting on water management and climate change. Welcome, Kathy. We're so excited to have you.
Okay, so I have a lot of information here, so I'm going to go a little bit fast, all right? But stop me if you need me to. But the Water Management District is charged with managing and protecting the water resources of 16 counties, stretching from Orlando to the Florida Keys. Okay, over the last 70 years, as South Florida's population's grown, the district's primary role of providing flood control has expanded from operating one of the largest water management systems in the world to now including restoring the Everglades, improving water quality, and protecting coastal estuaries. So today I'm going to talk about water management and specifically how the system functions, what the district's doing regarding a changing climate, and what you can do to ensure the best flood protection for your property. So in 1949, the Florida legislature created the Central and Southern Florida Flood Control District, which is the predecessor to the South Florida Water Management District, to manage the CNSF project. And in 1972, with the Florida Water Resources Act, the state created 5 water management districts. And today, the South Florida Water Management District is the oldest and largest of the 5 water management districts. So the district manages thousands of miles of flood control infrastructure and delivers water to millions of South Floridians. Okay, this is the district's primary water control system in Martin and St. Lucie counties. The area is broken into individual drainage basins that are associated with the C canals. Here's the 25, the 24, the 23, and the 44. Okay, the area's connection to Lake Okeechobee is through the C44, and the C23, 24, and 25 canals are not connected to the lake. They are individual basins within the region. This slide is the coastal weir, which is the S48 structure along the C23 canal by Murphy Road. The elevation of the weir is 8 feet. Downstream of the weir is tidal, so the weir acts as a saltwater barrier for groundwater supply in western Martin County. This is the S80 structure at the locks off of State Road 76. One thing to note is that when this structure is open, it does not necessarily mean that water is being discharged from Lake Okeechobee. This structure's main purpose is to manage water levels in the C44 basin in western Martin County. So most of the time when this structure is open, it's just moving water away from the basin for flood protection, not from Lake Okeechobee. The S308 structure in Port Mayaca, which is about 27 miles to the west, has to be open to allow water from Lake Okeechobee to enter the C44 canal. So where does all the stormwater come from? It's the water that flows off the land because it has no place else to go. Open pervious land, such as this here, provides water with several options. It provides the ability for water to store on the land's surface, percolate into the ground, evaporate into the air, or run off into rivers and oceans. But after land is developed, pervious or open land is depleted, and the increased amount of impervious surface cannot store water, cannot allow water to percolate into the ground, so most of the water runs off, delivering more water faster than what drained naturally to the rivers and oceans. And this water carries sediment, chemicals, nutrients, and trash with it. So what happens to all this excess runoff? Well, it's very important to know the flow or know where your runoff goes and how it gets there. Why? Because we all have a role to play in preparing for storm season by managing our property to preserve water quality and prevent flooding. And if you understand how the stormwater is supposed to flow, you can let managers know when there's a problem in the system. And if you understand who's responsible for maintenance of the stormwater management system, you can help get problems resolved quickly. So water management in Florida has a 3-tiered system. There's the tertiary, secondary, and primary system. Drainage superhighways are the major canals and pump stations that are operated by the South Florida Water Management District. These are connected to the secondary canals operated by local water control districts, cities, or counties. You've seen this slide before, but the C canals are the primary drainage system operated by the district in Martin and St. Lucie counties. Okay, in turn, the secondary system is typically maintained by local government or special districts and connects farms and neighborhood systems. Sometimes your secondary system is that of a city or county, but in Florida we have special drainage districts or 298 districts, and the South Florida Water Management District has 72 of them. So if you live in one of these districts, they maintain the secondary system for your home or neighborhood. So tertiary systems are those local lakes and ponds maintained by property owners association or neighborhoods. Excess water drains first into swales, ditches, storm grates, and then it flows from this tertiary stormwater system to the secondary canals. Then it's carried to the larger primary canals that lead to regional storage or to the coast. So again, this is just that tertiary system of that three-level tiered system of tertiary, secondary, and primary drainage facilities. Okay, so now you know how the system's connected. So what happens during a storm? Well, in Florida, we have a rainy season and a dry season, and this chart shows that very well. Obviously, the rainy season being basically in the summertime. Floods can happen when large amounts of rainfall occur in a short period of time. Flooding may result from a single heavy prolonged storm, as well as from tropical systems or hurricanes. Another key point to remember is that as the ground becomes saturated with regular rains, there is more likelihood of surface water ponding or standing water in streets and yards after a downpour as the season progresses. The South Florida Water Management water managers and meteorologists closely monitor storms, especially tropical storms and hurricanes, and they prepare the district's water management system for potential rainfall that may impact the 16-county area. If you experience an increasing amount of water, make sure you report the flooding to your local drainage district. You can actually go to South Florida Water Management District's flood control page and type in your address, and that way you can find out the contact information of the correct entity to call. Okay, so all engineered infrastructure is designed to a specific storm event. Roads, neighborhood drainage systems, and even house pads elevations are designed to these specific rainfall events. So a road storm is a storm that is 4 to 6 inches of rain received in a 24-hour period. You can expect to see standing water in yards, swales, and ditches, but the crowns of the road should remain passable. A design storm is that of 7 to 10 inches of rain that falls within a 72-hour period. Roads as well as swales, ditches, and yards flood, but buildings should remain dry. And a 100-year storm is 10 to 20 inches or more of rain that falls in a 72-hour period. Newer buildings are required to be built above this 100-year storm elevation, but many houses and businesses can expect to be flooded. So these are just some of the recent storms that we've had and the amount of rain that has fallen, during these storms. And this rainfall absolutely is above and beyond even some of the 100-year flood storm. So what are we doing about it? Well, the South Florida Water Management District is strongly committed to addressing the impacts of climate change, including rising sea levels, changing rainfall, and flood patterns. Last year, the district hired our first district resiliency officer, Dr. Carolina Moran. Her focus is to ensure that the region's water resources and ecosystems resiliency now and in the future. So resiliency and flood protection. As a key part of its resiliency strategy, the district continues assessing the status of its flood control infrastructure and advancing adaptation strategies necessary to continue providing primary flood protection for South Florida and other mission-critical services. The Flood Protection Level of Service Program ensures the regional flood control system provides the desired level of flood protection upstream of the tidal structures in place today and will continue to do so with consideration for sea level rise as well as more intense rainfall events. Resiliency and water supply. As part of its adaptation strategies, the South Florida Water Management District maintains a saltwater interface monitoring and mapping program to determine the approximate location of the saltwater interface. The mapping identifies movement of saltwater inland, which would increase risk to water supply.
There was one question. We'll just ask. Haley wanted to know, how did the breakthrough of the inlet benefit our water management?
How did the breakthrough of the inlet benefit water management?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure I can answer that question, but I will say that there's two inlets, so I'm not sure if you're talking about the Fort Pierce Inlet or the St. Lucie Inlet, because the St. Lucie Inlet is connected to the system, our system, with the C44, C24, and C23 canals. This Fort Pierce Inlet is only connected to basically the C25 canal. So the St. Lucie Inlet used to be a moving inlet naturally, where it would open and then close naturally. And then, you know, in modern times, they just, they opened it permanently. And so we have that permanent inlet. So actually, it's more of a, in my opinion, it's more of an environmental change than a water management change.
Right.
Okay.
Right. It's a faster conveyance. Oop. Okay, Amanda.
When they permanently open the inlet, when they permanently open the inlet, it absolutely changed everything. So.
Right. So it helped with flood control, but it didn't help with water quality necessarily. It pushes the water out.
Right. I'm not even sure it really helped with flood control, but I don't know. I don't know that. That's more of a historical question that I just don't have the answer to at this time.
Okay. And then Diane Goldberg wanted to know, what changes are the water management districts doing to help with climate change? Are you making, you hired a resilience officer, which is fantastic. So maybe we can have lunch. But what are some of the other things that you're focusing on that are specific to climate change?
Okay, well, one of the things that we are doing is that we obviously the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan projects will increase the district's ability to manage water for both the benefit of people and the environment. Okay, and the district is supporting additional grant applications to study or I guess investigate the effectiveness of nature-based features such as mangroves at attenuating the effects of storm surge on coastal communities. We are also developing a set of water and climate resilience metrics to track and document shifts and trends in the district managed water climate observed data, and that will help assess current and future climate condition scenarios and help with operational decisions and prioritize resiliency projects. And then last but not least, the district is seeking to work with the Army Corps of Engineers to initiate the Central and South Florida Flood Resiliency Study. So this study would analyze the current system, which is the CNSF project, all of the sea canals, and it would start the groundwork for a series of flood protection canals, and make them resilient to climate change and sea level rise, and we would assess which infrastructures at the highest risk of impact and vulnerabilities, and hopefully, because we are working with the Corps, it would result in actionable recommendations to Congress. So that's kind of the main things that we're doing resiliency wise. Bye.
Thank you so much, Kathy. So our
Alrighty,
next speaker is Amanda Thompson. She's the Senior Land Stewardship and Outreach Coordinator at the Oxbow Eco Center. She's been with the St. Lucie Environmental Resources Department since July 2009. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree in anthropology from the University of Guelph, and she coordinates the St. Lucie Hikes programs, is a lead instructor for the Florida Master Naturalist program, and a certified interpretive trainer for the National Association of Interpretation. Amanda is responsible for educational opportunities and signage at our St. Lucie County preserves, and today she'll be presenting on groundwater and sea level rise. So thank you, Amanda, and welcome.
Hi, everyone. I hope that you can hear me okay. So Natalie and I are working in the same office, so hopefully we won't get any reverb, but I'm gonna just step back behind this device here, and I wanted to show you a really cool model that we use for water education. Hopefully I don't fall over the cord. All right, Nat, can you see me okay? I can see Sandy's thumbs up. Yay! All right. So this lovely tool right in front of me is called a groundwater model. And one of the cool things about this is a lot of the times we forget about the water that's all around us all the time, right? So many of us think of surface water, the rain and the clouds, the stuff that you can visually see. But where you're standing right now, where you're sitting right now, is right above water. I hope nobody's tushy got wet. Just thinking about it, right? No. So this is our groundwater model, and what's neat about it is it shows, it took, like somebody took a knife and just cut the earth open and shows you all the different layers that we actually have underground that help filter and clean our water. So one of the big aquifers in Florida is called the Floridan Aquifer, and it actually comes all the way up from the Southern Carolinas down through Alabama and Georgia and down into Florida. And it's a really important groundwater system that we get a lot of our drinking water from. And so this groundwater model gives us a little preview of some of the impacts that can happen. So right now I have this lovely pump in the back. I'm going to move it back and forth. It does get a little loud, so I'm going to kind of keep it back over. What's nice about this system, though, it shows you in a rain event how all of the water moves through the ground. And then in a drought, when I move the pump away, it creates like a drought system, and we can see how the water level drops. So one of the things I want to show you right now is I have an abundance of flooding right now. We have some major storm events coming, big hurricane, and I'm going to run out in front. I'm going to draw the line because I know you guys may not be able to see it as well on there, but this, and that's not the right one to use. I'm going to use the black one. This is currently where all the water levels are. And that's our septic tank there. And then right as happened up here, it's actually flooding in that area. So when I drop this during a drought, we're actually going to see the water level slowly drop kind of everywhere. And you can see the lake, it's actually dropping down right now. Now, why is that important? Well, that's important because every time that water is pulled from one area during a drought, that whatever's in the ground will leach and move. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples of that. But while I'm up front, I kind of want to point out these different layers and the amenities that we have here, right? Or the things that are highlighted. So these long things, these are wells. So this short well here is something that might be used in irrigation around your yard. This one here is more of like a residential, one where you might have a well in your yard if you're not connected to the sewer. And then in the back here, this long one, that's usually what cities will tap down into the Florida aquifer, and they'll get their drinking water from there. Now, what's kind of neat is this thing is built, it looks like we've got AstroTurf up front, which represents our grass layer, our topsoil layer. And then as it breaks down, it goes from fine soils to larger rocks, right? And there's this really cool layer here called an aquitard, and it is a clay layer. And what happens is water that gets to there kind of sits on this layer, but there's little openings in it that allow water to kind of penetrate underneath. By the time water gets here though, it's usually very clean and very pure. So let me go ahead and talk about some of the things though that can really affect our waterways. And I want you to see our lake is actually completely drained. So in a drought condition, and you guys have probably seen that, wetlands dry up, lakes and canals will drop down. But when it is a rain event, it can really flood and make a big impact. And you'll see that here. This is now flooding right up to that black line. So in Florida, our system, because we're so close at sea level, right, our systems are really heavily impacted by just a little bit of water too. So let me go ahead and start showing how we're gonna do this. And I may have to move this out just a little bit so we're not flooding everywhere all the time. But there's a few things that we end up putting on our ground or around our waterways that really do heavily impact. And one of the questions Haley had earlier was about non-source pollution. And the interesting thing about that is it is dog waste left behind, fertilizer used, trash littering the area, right? So what's nice about this model though, is I can show you how just a few things can make a huge impact on our waterway, especially in an area that's invisible to our naked eye. We just don't see it. So sometimes it's easier out of sight, out of mind. You can push it all away. But let's see here, I've got this lovely purple dye. I'm just gonna put a few drops down. But what if I was worried about that crabgrass growing all around my driveway and stuff? Instead of hand pulling it, I've decided I'm just gonna spray some stuff on it. So what's kind of interesting though, is if we start looking at that, this lake area, say I live right about here, I'm not that close to the water, or so I think I'm not so close to water, maybe I'm a couple miles away. And as we start seeing things happen, you'll see as it starts spreading around. So let me go ahead, I'm just gonna put a couple of drops down because those crazy ragweed are just so hard, and crabgrass are so hard to get rid of. Okay, so there's my fertilizer down. And then one of the other things that people tend to use quite a bit is pesticides, right? Things to get rid of those nasty bugs that you don't want around your house, cockroaches and ants and things like that. Well, just by putting a little bit on the ground, I'm not hurting anything, right? Maybe I'll put it up here a little closer to my house. And I'm nowhere near a lake, so there's no problem, right? So we start seeing that these small things that we all do around our house are things that we can actually start working on and trying not to use in our yard. But as you can see, just from the herbicide that I use, we can already see how it's impacting the lake, right? And that was just one person putting some stuff on the ground. Historically, people actually used to put stuff down wells. So I'm going to give you an example of kind of what happens with that. So just say I'm out here, oh, here's my septic tank, and there's a bunch of chemicals and old medicine that I have in my kitchen, and I'm not quite sure what to do with it. Some people may flush it down the toilet, and those that are not connected to the city water goes into a septic tank, and I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm gonna pour it down there. Not a big deal, right? Out of sight, out of mind. But what happens is when these systems are functioning properly, these underground tanks, these storage tanks, and these septic tanks, when they work properly, they're sealed and things are supposed to be contained. But as they age, they no longer work properly. They tend to get holes in them, or they allow water or affluent that's inside to leach out. you can really start seeing the big impact that it does. And I don't know, Natalie, can we see that on the screen, the red
Yeah,
coming down? Very cool.
you can see the purple plume too under
Oh,
the well.
geez. Okay. So what's kind of interesting about this though, is when we start looking, all right, so now it's moving here in the groundwater. Not many things pull it up from the groundwater. So what happens is things like detergent blooms or pollution or oils that have been dropped into the groundwater historically actually will continue to move into an area. And I know in Fort Pierce, Western Fort Pierce, they were having problems with a detergent bloom that was under the ground. And what happens is it's slowly making its way. And every time it makes its way past a well, it pollutes the well. And then it'll slowly make its way past, polluting the next area as well. What we do on land really does make an impact. And if you think about this, just one person putting down a few herbicides, a few pesticides to try and get rid of some things, I'm making a huge impact on our water. And I don't know about you, but I know for me, I don't want to drink water that comes from that area. So another thing that also happens is that when there's something that people can't get rid of, they used to do something called deep well injections. They still do. But this larger well here, say something is so bad that they're hoping that if they put it down into the ground, that by the time we have to deal with it again, remember, out of sight, out of mind, that it should be cleaner and easier to deal with. But what happens is that ends up affecting all of our other areas as we start looking down here. Look how it's spreading out. This is our clean Florida aquifer, and now suddenly we have all these pollutants coming down. So I love this model because it just makes you that visual, like, wow, something that I do makes such an impact. But what happens in an area when there's a drought, right? So there's a drought. Let me get rid of some of this red dye. There's a drought, and we start pulling water from other areas. And this happens too. You guys might have heard something called a saltwater intrusion. And I know Kathy said South Florida Water Management is mapping that, which is really cool. As sea level rises, we start to have salt water start intruding into our aquifer and groundwater system that normally didn't contain much salt. And unfortunately, we can't drink salt water. It's hard to water plants with salt water. They'll all die, right? So we want to make sure that we're trying to keep our systems clean. But what happens is as the area gets drier, so we have extreme storm events, we'll have flooding, and then we'll have drought. And during those drought events, anytime somebody pulls water, let's see if I can do this right now. Here we go. So say there's a drought event and I'm pulling more water than I need, or as much as I can, you'll see how it starts to pull water from other areas of the ground system, right? So as an example, cities who run out of water, when they run out of water, they start buying water from neighboring cities or watersheds so that they can start kind of supplementing their water. Well, when that happens, we're actually pulling all the stuff we don't want into our water system because the groundwater is not recharging properly. And so I know in St. Lucie County, and they've been working with South Florida Water Management District, that there is a new ordinance going in place that actually gets us to stop watering our lawns so much. It's that same idea that during drought times, we're actually pulling too much water from the groundwater system and we're not allowing it enough time to recharge, right? So if you guys get a chance, if you go online, South Florida Water Management, and soon the Oxbow Between the Pines newsletter will have a lovely article about this new ordinance. Perfect. So if we're looking at the system, and I hope you guys have lots of questions because you could spend hours talking about this model, but I want to make sure that I'm highlighting all the parts that you guys have questions about. But the one thing that's kind of interesting to me is how it's all connected, right? So we have our septic tanks here, our lakes here. Look what happens when the flooding event happens. Look at that septic tank leaking is now coming into the lake, right? That's further away. How could it make such an impact, right? But this is all one connected system. As the lake fills, it will trickle down into the stream or the spring, right? And in Florida, if we start thinking about this, this could be like the river, this could be like the lagoon, and then into the back, is like the ocean. And I hope you guys can see this. I don't know if it's showing up very well because I have the water bouncing here, but now all of that red from the leaking septic tank has gone through the lake, out to the Indian River Lagoon, and now into the Atlantic Ocean. So our water systems are so connected, right? We only have a limited supply of water on the planet, that if we pollute some of these areas, we can never get them back. So that's one of the things that this model really helps us illustrate. And I want to thank you all very much for letting me kind of show this model to you. I'd love to get your questions or questions that you have about how this runs or about anything in relation to this. But thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. And I know there's a really great video that Ms. Ren Underwood did on our SLC TV, where she actually did a little bit more of an in-depth talk about this groundwater model system and how it can affect everything. And you can see it in full motion on that video as well. All right, do we have any questions?
We do, great demonstration. Chris Lockhart loves that demo. Might have to share it with her. And this is kind of interesting. I wish we still had Kathy LaMartina on the line, because she may have been able to add to this question from Diane Goldberg. Our state legislators want to build deep injection wells to store canal water with runoff from farms, and then retrieve the water later to clean it for drinking water. What problems can this create?
So Diane, that's a really great question. And that's something when we talk about this with kids a lot, when we used to do this program, is one of the things is, I think they hope that when they put it in the ground, that enough technology and time will pass that when they retrieve it, they're able to take care of it better, right? The goal is that when it goes into the ground, it gets filtered more, and then we're dealing with less on the way up. But I know Kathy would be a great brain for this, because as far as we're concerned, and all the kids I've ever taught about this, you can't fix something that's too hard to fix right now, 5 years from now, and hope that it's better, right? So it's it's kind of a scary, very scary thing that's happening. But you have to think about, what are they going to do with all this, heavily polluted waters that are in wells? Like, people used to dump, I know old photography that used heavy metals to produce photos. I mean, they used to just dump that down a well or on the ground. And they've said things about oil changes that are not done properly. Like, one oil change can pollute millions of gallons of water. And that's just from one person dumping it on the ground. So in the long run, yes, it is very upsetting that politicians are starting to push towards this. However, all of this starts with us on our end and doing those small changes around the house, right? And then we can give that voice. These are the things that we do to make the water better. These are the things that everybody needs to do to make our water better. And I want to show you guys again. I just moved it, but our ocean is not looking so good. You guys see how red it is? That's a very red Atlantic Ocean. So, all right, any other questions? I hope, Diane, that helped a little bit, but that's usually how we teach it when we talk to children about it.
Well, and I think it's about risk, and there's a lot of unknowns.
Right.
Obviously, Diane particularly talked about farmland, and in the early days, we didn't require online retention of runoff from farmland. And so it's almost like bulk stormwater runoff, right? So obviously we could try to handle our runoff better, and there may be ways to engineer out of it, but is it good? Is it dangerous? I'm not sure that we know all the answers, because those systems move. That water system isn't contained. It moves, and it moves northwest, and it moves up. But we do have 2 more questions. Is there a system that can be put into place at a septic system to filter out the overflow before poison gets into the water system?
Okay, so that's actually a good question. I've been working with our Pedravis Preserve ATU system, which is an aerobic treatment unit that goes in. It's kind of a step above a septic tank in the world of treatment of effluent, right? All of the waste that goes in there. The problem is septic tanks need to be replaced. The older ones that are damaged, it's really hard to mitigate what needs to be done. And in a lot of cases, the cost for mitigation to try and repair a septic tank is almost the cost of buying a new septic tank. And buying the newer systems, they tend to have those great standards that make sure that any effluent that ever escapes is treated a little bit better. But I know for us, like the ATU unit that we're going to be putting in at Travis, what's neat about it is it has an additional treatment kind of containment area before it gets to the drain field that helps remove excess nitrogens and nitrates and all phosphorus and all sorts of cool stuff. So there's a lot of things that can be done. I know there's areas where they're built like kind of water gardens and swells around septic tanks to kind of help mitigate and stop that flow out. But septic tanks are, they're one that people are working very, very hard. It does cost a lot of money to move them over, but like the city of PSL just worked very hard along the river with a huge grant to convert a whole bunch over from septic to sewer. And that's probably how a lot of these systems are going to end up being, because no matter what happens, whatever goes into a septic tank is going to be held in the ground for the duration of the septic tank. And it's not great stuff we're putting in there, right? So it's better for whatever goes in there to be in a treatment system ahead of time. And I will, like when in August, if we get that all set up, you guys should come out and check it out. It'll be a really cool thing to check out.
So hopefully everybody's on our Oxbow happening, so they'll know about it. And one last question from Sarah Luring. She wants to know, where did we get the model? Did we hand build it and design it, or did we purchase it?
So there's, lucky for me, they put the tag on the back of the model. So it's Creative LabWorks, one word, Creative, and then LabWorks, one word. And they do environmental education products. It's all made in the USA. And what's nice is the systems can vary a little bit, but like this one was just refabbed, which I love. It's a very fancy one. Ours before the labeling was starting to come off, but it's really good. And I think they'll work with schools and stuff if you guys get like education grants to help purchase them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And you know,
All right.
it seems like with a lot of these questions, Sarah says thank you. It seems with a lot of these questions, it's helping us to get insight into potential for future programs and like what people want to learn about. So, and I'm sure Natalie was going to do this, but you know, there is the Oxbow at stluciecode.org. And if people have recommendations or further questions, they can always send it in and we'll continue to develop these opportunities. So thank you, Amanda. And I'm going to turn it back to Natalie.
Okay, well, thank you guys all for attending. If you have any questions, feel free to keep putting them in the chat. We'll have the second part of this webinar series tomorrow is going to be climate change cascading impacts. It'll be from 1 until 3 again, just like today. And it'll be the same Zoom link, but we will resend it as a reminder tomorrow. And tomorrow we will have joining us Mike Middlebrook from St. Lucie County Environmental Resources Department talking about migrating habitats. We'll have Vincent Encomio from Florida Sea Grant talking about coastal habitat impacts of climate change. Jan Four from FWC talking about invasive reptiles and expanding ranges. And Dr. Tim Moore from FAU Harbor Branch talking about warming waters and algae blooms. So we hope you guys all come and join us tomorrow as well. Have a great afternoon.